Hello to everyone who is signed on. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, so hang tight until then. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get started with today's webinar. Thanks for joining us for today's edition of the hashtag Slinkythink sessions. First thing I'd like for everyone to do is if within the chat, if you can let me know how everybody's doing today. Either drop me an emoji or write one word to describe how you're feeling. I'm sure that will be easier said than done. I'm seeing a smile. This is good. Flexible. I like it. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to get started. I know we're going to have some more people joining us in just a little bit. But my name is Drew Kinchis, and I am the marketing director, and also I develop various courses, workshops, and things for BeLife. I'll talk a little bit more about us in just a second, but really the point of why you're here today for today's workshop, obviously it's titled Unleash Your Productivity with Kanban. But what I'm going to be doing is talking about the idea of what Lean is and also what Kanban is from more of a why perspective. We'll talk a little bit about how to actually implement it later in the course, but I get a little frustrated, maybe some of you would agree, when you see promises of productivity hacks and hey, if you take this webinar for an hour, suddenly everything that you've ever tried to get done will magically start happening. Well, that's not what's gonna happen today. We're gonna talk about what Kanban really is, the principles of it, and how you can take this idea of Kanban as a framework, thinking in an agile sort of way, and implement this in various different softwares. Chris and I do not get any sort of cut from Trello or Asana or Monday.com. So no worries there. We're not using this as a promotional tool, but really the idea is to get the why of it all into your heads. And so you can use it over a program you feel familiar with and what you're using right now, and just make sure that you're using it in the right way to empower your teams moving forward. So as I mentioned before, I just wanted to introduce ourselves. My name is Drew Kinchis, and as I said earlier, I'm the marketing director for BeLife. BeLife is an organization, so what do we do? Well, you can see here, our tagline is people, culture, agile. You know, we're trying to help organizations transform via the power of agile and start getting organizations to think more about being iterative, focusing more on continuous improvement. And the reason why people is first in that tagline is because organizational transformations can't start without people being on board. And I see this pretty often, that organizations expect to be some sort of magical pixie dust that is scattered throughout the halls of the workplace, and suddenly culture is improved, and that's just not how that works. So as part of us wanting to empower individuals to therefore empower teams and make organizations great, we provide these bi-weekly webinars that we hope are helpful for all of you. So the term BeLife, life actually means agility. So for us, BeLife is us reminding everyone who comes in contact with us, everyone we work with, to keep thinking in an agile sort of way. Okay, so our goal is to be, well, we're trying to help teams and individuals be the best they can be, and we do this by introducing agile methodologies and people-focused practices. So I won't keep dwelling on what BeLife is, but we love this term, hashtag Slinkythink. Oops, I forgot the, there we go. And our logo is a slinky because slinkies are agile, right? And so hashtag Slinkythink, we started it as a way to describe how we think about agile. And it's come to encompass not only how we think, but also how the individuals that we interact with think in this sort of agile sort of setting. So if you have any agile epiphanies as the days go on, or if there's something that you have as a strong takeaway from this session, I'd love for you to post this on social media and post, you know, the one sentence or two that you get out of this workshop, and then just tag hashtag Slinkythink. It makes us, makes our hearts grow fonder, and it also reminds us that that we're making an impact, which is always super exciting. So Chris is the brains of this operation. As I mentioned before, yours truly is speaking. Chris has over 30 years of executive level experience in software development. Yours truly, I have worked extensively with lots of nonprofit organizations, entrepreneurial communities. I used to run a co-working space here in Indianapolis. So Chris and I are a great team in that he has this direct agile experience. I see the struggles that a lot of small businesses go through. And so together we're helping to empower businesses of all kinds to just be better. So let's get to what we're going to be talking about today. The goal of today's webinar, we're going to unpack how to begin thinking in a lean manner, the ins and outs of Kanban, its foundational pillars of values, and how to manifest the benefits of adopting Kanban through visual project management tools. As I said earlier, this is not going to be a workshop on how to use Trello or how to use Asana. You can easily sign up for these programs for free and find a blog post that will explain such a thing. And I would recommend doing that, and I'll talk more about that later. But this is going to be more about the core principles and the why of how to use these programs well. So in today's agenda, first we're going to be talking about lean thinking. We're going to unpack what we mean by working in a lean manner, its origins, its principles, and application. Then we're going to talk about Kanban 101. And put simply, it's a way to visualize, organize, and complete work. We'll cover the 5 rules that define the framework. Third, we will look, I made a sample Trello board just to show how some of these principles work in action. And we've created a kind of a Trello board that's pretty basic for everybody to be able to use. And then we've also made another board which has a gentle iteration for anyone in software development. And then section 4, implementation, will give you some steps of what you can do directly after this workshop to start using Kanban in an effective manner. And if you're eating lunch right after the workshop, do that. If you haven't had lunch yet, I would recommend it. If you're eating lunch right now, that's totally fine as well. So let's get to it. All right, so first thing I'd like to do is break the ice. I work remotely. I deal with a lot of remote teams, especially being in a co-working facility. And I often find that we kind of get into the work without really getting to know each other. So I'd like to briefly ask all of you, since we're going to be talking about workflow and productivity, I would like you to describe to me in the chat a sentence or two of how you get unstuck. So what I mean by that is if you've just really hit a mental block, you're kind of in a rut, what is something that you do to help you get unstuck and get back into the flow of work? So for me, an example would be to hop on my bike, take a quick little 10, 15-minute ride, get some fresh air. So take a second and put how you get unstuck in the chat. I'd love to see what you all do. I love it. Watch an unrelated YouTube video. Yes, we've all lost plenty of time on YouTube. Cool. So I'm seeing a lot of responses from people talking about just taking a break. An addiction to nitro cold brew. I've been there before. I gave up coffee at the end of last year, but yes, cold brew, especially when it starts to get hot, is it's hard to say no. But what we're seeing, if everybody's looking in the chat, right, that everyone just needs to take a quick break and not be productive, quote unquote. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, that if you've set up your workflow to be 100% full all the time, it's a really stressful way to work, because if anything out of the ordinary happens, then suddenly you feel behind, and we don't want that to be happening. So yeah, it's really great that it looks like everybody here takes that time to break out and to get refocused. So I'm all about vulnerability, especially if we're going to empower organizations. If we're going to empower ourselves as professionals, we need to be very okay with talking about what we're not good at or what we struggle with, right? So I would like you to write in the chat, just to answer this question I have on the slide, how do you typically feel at the end of the work week? Now, of course, every week is different. Some weeks we feel a lot better than others, but I'd like you to use one word to describe how you typically feel at the end of your work week. It could be 5 o'clock on Friday for a lot of us, but if that's not the case, so be it. But I'd like you to write one word to describe how you feel, and then a sentence to explain why you feel that way. And which, by the way, I forgot to mention, Chris is here in the chat as well, and he will chime in when needed, when he has some epic epiphany to explain to everybody. But he did just mention, does the work week ever end? That's a great insight. Perhaps not. So we're seeing some different responses here. You know, we have some, Carla mentioned she's jazzed because she got a lot done. Daniel's mentioning that he feels relieved because he's able to recharge over the weekend. Stu said disappointed because I didn't get everything done. Well, the term in that sentence, which is really interesting, is everything. And I describe this to a lot of my cohorts and people that I talk to very frequently, in that the definition of misery is that gap between expectations and reality. So if we're not setting realistic expectations for where we want to be at the, let's say, end of a sprint, or at the end of the work week, or just the end of the day, we're going to consistently feel like we haven't accomplished everything that we need to accomplish, right? And so we're going to talk about that today, and setting those realistic expectations, and just being honest about what we can accomplish in a given amount of time. I think it's really, really important for workplace morale, and to allow people to feel challenged, but not too challenged to the point of where there's just consistent stress day in and day out. So let's hop down to lean thinking. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but if any of you do have questions, and I appreciate that a lot of you are interacting with me, it's a lot more fun to have a little bit of a dialogue via chat versus just talking and only hearing myself. If you do have questions, though, in general, feel free to hit us up in the chat function, and we'll also be providing contact information after the workshop for you to hit us up if you do have any questions about anything that was mentioned here in today's webinar. So what is lean thinking? Lean thinking is a business methodology that aims to provide a new way to think about how to organize human activities to deliver more benefits to society and value to individuals while eliminating waste. So some of you may or may not know the origins of lean thinking, but it started in the automotive industry and then moved to manufacturing, from manufacturing to other industries. So lean thinking is used in software development, financial institutions, retail, pharmaceutical, healthcare, so on and so forth. So one of the biggest takeaways from lean thinking, and I hope this is one of the big takeaways you get from this webinar, is it's a discipline and a philosophy. So the philosophy fuels the discipline, right? And so if you understand why we're doing this and why this is all important, it's only going to allow you to do the how in a much more efficient sort of way. So there's various steps to be lean. So in the big picture, lean encourages us to look at the whole, to view our work holistically, right? So these are 5 different steps to be lean. And I will say this, that this workshop, a few of the different topics that I'm covering, like lean thinking, like Kanban itself, these are entire programs that we've actually developed on their own. So I'm just going to be touching base on some of these ideas, but I will make sure to, when I send you an email after today's session, that you'll get information about some of these courses that we offer that really are deeper dives into some of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about today. So these steps to be lean. Define value. You know, value is something that as business owners in any sort of organization, it's incredibly important that we're consistently providing value for our customers. If we don't provide value to our customers, we will not have customers. Incredibly important. Iterating to perfection. Chris has hosted a workshop before that I was attending, and there was a gentleman in the crowd who said, well, is there such a thing as perfection? Of course not, there isn't. But the idea is you're wanting to create something in the best way possible. Do we ever quite get there? Probably not, but it's important to do that, to consistently try to be focusing on improvement and iterating and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Map value stream. You know, this is what we're going to be talking about from front to back, right? What kind of value are you creating from the very beginning of something you're working on to the actual delivery and the definition of done? Create flow. This is really big with visual project management tools, and that you're actually seeing work happening from left to right, and you're seeing that work occurring in real time. Especially with remote teams, it's really hard to see the work that's happening because everybody's not in the same room, right? And so making sure everybody's on the same page of what that flow looks like is really, really important. So one thing we're going to be talking about moving forward is, it's actually on our next slide, but one of the big things to think about is identifying and then eliminating waste. So getting rid of anything that doesn't add value to a customer is incredibly important. Many organizations get caught up in processes and you know, this is the way something has to get done, so on and so forth. But often there's a lot of waste in how we accomplish our tasks. And so if we can consistently assess what that waste is and remove it, as much of it as possible, to continue to deliver as much value as possible, that's really, really important. Amplify learning. You know, we want to speed up the learning process by having short iteration cycles, which is really important. You know, if something is or isn't working, let's acknowledge that pretty quickly and then move forward. You know, we hear the term a lot, fail fast, and that's the idea there, right? That if something's not working, let's change it and let's do it pretty quickly and keep moving forward. Empowering the team is incredibly important here as well. You know, bring on good people, get out of their way. This is all part of lean thinking, right? So I'm going to hop to the next slide here. I want to embellish a little bit about what is waste, right? And so, as I said before, anything that does not add value is considered to be waste. Things that add cost and which your customer would not pay for. So I think it's an interesting relationship between waste and value, because if we define value as something that our customer is empowered with, or it's something that that we can sell to a customer and they say, yes, this is something I want, I'm paying you for this. I mean, that is a literal manifestation of value. they don't necessarily see the internal processes that can hold us back from delivering the most amount of value as possible. So I think a lot of organizations dwell on value, and saying, okay, how can we get as much output as possible? But if you're not considering what's going on internally and seeing what blockers and things are getting in the way of you being as productive as possible, you're not going to be able to have as strong of an output as you'd like, right? So that's why I think figuring out what waste is really, really important. So don't forget to do this. So I love this little Venn diagram here, right? So this is the perfect scenario if we have what our customer wants versus what we're thinking our company is versus what can we actually produce, right? And so this is the, as the slide mentions here, the great juggling act, right? And that the greatest amount of value is in the center of this Venn diagram. So just a few takeaways about lean thinking. And I know I'm just kind of stepping my toes in the water, so to speak, but it's a discipline and a philosophy. And these are the 7 principles that fuel lean, right? You want to identify waste, amplify learning, decide late, deliver fast, empower the team, build in integrity, and then see the whole picture. And this is going to be, I think this is going to make a little bit more sense once we hop into what exactly Kanban is. The reason I'm mentioning what lean is first is because lean is a lot of what fuels the idea of Kanban, right? So I'm going to be sending everybody a link after this session too. If you really want to dive into lean thinking and its ins and outs, I'll be able to provide that for all of you right after when the session is done. So I'd like to ask everybody really quickly, I talked a lot about waste and just some inefficiencies that organizations have that are holding them back from producing as much as they would like and delivering that value for their customers. I'd like for you to write in the chat just one sentence about what is something that you struggle with waste within your organization. Are your meetings incredibly inefficient? Therefore, you're wasting time that you could be working on other tasks to finish projects, to be able to deliver products, so on and so forth. Write just one sentence in the chat about what are some examples or what is something that you see in your workplace that you would define as quote unquote waste. Okay, this is really good. Yeah, repeating information. The Office of Redundancy Office, I think that might have been a Monty Python skit back in the day. When people are not actually, and Carla mentioned this, conversation's not focused, and then Braden says repeating information. Those two are very, very intertwined with one another, right? If we're not on the same page of what we're trying to accomplish in a meeting, it's gonna go all over the place. Many meetings to determine scope and to make decisions. Another great point there. If we're just having meetings to simply provide updates for each other and we don't have a super strong focus what we're trying to do, that's not going to help us moving forward. All right, so thanks for sharing on that. So the reason I ask what you're struggling with regarding waste is because Kanban is a really effective tool, a framework to be able to help you to minimize waste. And in the simplest form, it's a visual way to complete work. And it's designed to indicate a workflow that limits work in progress. And we're going to talk about the abbreviation for that is WIP, work in progress, WIP. And one thing you're going to hear me talk a lot about for the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes is transparency and how important it is to be transparent with your teams. And Kanban is a huge part in making that happen. So I'm going to ask another quick question here. Transparency, I just mentioned why it's really, really important for teams to be able to be on the same page of who's doing what kind of work and what challenges we're having as a team. I'd like for you to type a number in the chat from 0 to 10 of how transparent you feel your team is regarding the work that they're doing. So 0 would be no one has really a clue of what everyone's doing. And 10 would be, yes, we are all very clear of everyone's roles and responsibilities, and there's a lot of autonomy that exists within the organization. And don't worry, I won't share this information. If you have a low score, I won't share this with anybody you work with. Okay, so we're seeing a lot we're getting responses from all over the board. We've got some low numbers, we've got some high numbers. So that's interesting to see that we've got a lot of variance regarding how people think of transparency within their workplace. So let's talk about how we become more transparent. So the principles of Kanban, it requires real-time communication of capacity and full transparency of work. So you have these 6 principles here that really fuel Kanban and its ideology, so to speak. So know your current state. You know, this is an important concept to understand where you're truly at as an organization right now. And I think also from an individual level, this is very, very important. You know, what are we trying to accomplish? How are we trying to do that? Improve through incremental change. I mentioned this earlier, but if we're going to be iterative, we have to consistently review what we're trying to do and make sure that we are honest with one another, and that we not only are honest, but when we say we're going to be consistently seeing what we're doing and how we're going to make it better, that we hold ourselves to it, and we just don't consistently push retrospectives and stand-ups and things, that we push those back and that we don't hold ourselves to those rules. Self-organize around the work. Here at BeLife, we're really big fans of letting the people who are the most qualified to do the work to do it. So the idea of a waterfall sort of workplace, right, is that you have a manager who tells another manager who tells another manager, so on and so forth. And the power tends to be within roles, not within the teams themselves. So that's an important part of Kanban, is that you're letting the team self-organize and decide what's best for the team itself. Improve outcomes by constantly improving policies. Once again, similar to improving through incremental change. Be clear and explicit with policies. It's incredible. I think micromanagement, one of the key factors that creates micromanagement, is when a manager claims that they have an expectation of an employee, and what's actually in their head is different than what they've said out loud. And so therefore that employee can never, that individual can never live up to expectations because they don't really know what those expectations are. And then lastly, encourage leadership and empowerment. That's also very, very important. Let the people in your organization have emotional ownership about what they're doing, which once again takes us back to the idea of having the team to self-organize around the work. So let's go over the rules of Kanban here. So the first rule of Kanban is you want to visualize what's going on, right? Research shows that the brain can process visual information over 50,000 times faster than text. You know, a great example of this is when you're traveling down the road. If you see that you have rocks in your way, you're just going to get out of the way, right? I mean, you're going to, we all respond to visual cues, and quite often, and I think it's because I would argue we're a very podcast heavy culture now, which is great. I love podcasts myself, but we've also been spoiled by being able to communicate with people on the phone very quickly. And being able to see something, I think, is really, really valuable. If you're going to allow an entire team to be very visual about what they're doing, you have to have trust with everyone. And once again, brings us back to that vulnerability and accountability portion, in that not only are we trying to make sure that teams, the individuals within teams have everything they need to succeed, but we also want to visualize the work because we want to reward individuals when they do great work as well. So this is not just a way to manage and to make sure that everyone is doing the work they're supposed to be doing. This is also a way to reward individuals by being able to see their exact output. So WIP limits, this is really, really important. So I think the idea a lot of us, and I'm guilty of this, maybe more than anyone, is setting a realistic expectation for what I can get done in a day or what I can get done in a week is very, very challenging. And if I say I'm going to work 40 hours this week, just to throw out a number, a lot of times we all as individuals fill up our schedule as much as humanly possible for that 40 hours, right? That there's no flex time or there's no time to have quote unquote wiggle room. Well, it looks like, hey, we're being efficient because we're working 100% of the time. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that if anything happens out of the ordinary from the tasks that you're working on or a certain project, you don't have time set aside to adjust to what that is. And so studies actually have dictated that the speed, efficiency, and output of quality actually decreases when we all as individuals are filled to the max. So even time blocking like an hour every day, I think is a really important way to say, hey, look, I'm just not going to schedule anything in this amount of time. And if there's overflow from a separate project, that's totally fine. I'll show you on the Trello board when we get to it in just a second about how you actually define what WIP is regarding your doing section, the task that you're actually working on regarding Kanban. So measure and manage flow. This one's pretty simple, right? We can't decide what's working if we don't collect data. And quite often, we find that most people are not willing to admit themselves that they're working, quote unquote, in an inefficient sort of way. But what's interesting is when you have a separate person looking at someone's process, you know, how they're working, what they're doing, or if you're looking at a team and how they're all working together, if you're able to see the flow and have someone look at it from a outsider's perspective that isn't in the team itself as they're working, that can provide some pretty interesting perspective of how the team can be more efficient. So I'll talk about this in just a second, but don't make all your decisions on a hunch. You know, don't say, well, I think this isn't working, or I think this isn't a really efficient way for us to be doing this. I think it's really important to measure what you're doing, collect that data, and move forward. So as I said before, you know, these are some of the keys that you can use to measure and manage flow. So if you are able to actually measure what you're doing and what's working and what isn't working from a quantitative sort of perspective, this is going to allow you to move forward and have a foundation for improvement that's based on facts, not just on hunches. I will provide a PDF for you all after this course that embellishes a little bit more about some of these different concepts here. You know, lead time is very simple. It's just the time taken from request to completion. The cycle time is the time taken to finish a task. Throughput, measure of productivity and the amount of work delivered in a time frame. Value stream is the flow of work from start to completion. And then swarming, you know, all the focus is on one item by everybody involved. So I'll send you all a document that has a little bit more information about how to measure and manage flow, because I think this is a really important aspect of Kanban that we all want to get really, really good at. Kanban rule number 4, make policies explicit. As I said before, you can't improve something that you don't understand. I think this one's pretty common sense. So what does this look like when you're going to make your policies explicit? Well, as I said earlier, you want your choices to be rational and empirical, and you want to have an objective discussion of issues. We are all human beings. We're going to take emotional investment in what we do. If we only use our emotions to make decisions, it's probably not going to work out in the long run. And one of the wonderful phrases I like to use is, I think it's okay to have emotions, right? We're all human beings. That's what happens. But think emotionally, but don't react emotionally. So by having these policies be super clear, this allows for us to, once again, rely on data and not just on hunches. So done rules, all this explains is, you know, rules that should be written for each step in the process. Shared understanding. what is required to deliver value. That's what shared understanding means. Self-governing, as I mentioned earlier, teams can create quick, sustained, and updated policies that help them self-govern. So they can create the processes that are going to empower them the most. And then share the process, right? The process needs to be defined. So everyone should understand how things work and how the work is actually done. So the last rule of Kanban rule number 5, enable continuous improvement. Be vulnerable and courageous enough to adapt to thrive. So this is all about, once again, vulnerability. It's very, very important to admit when things aren't working, fail fast, change, and continue to adapt and make your workplace better. Okay, so I'm gonna pop over this question and we're gonna go to section 3. So some visual project management tools. So I have mentioned a little bit about Trello and how this sort of visual workflow looks like, right? So I want to ask really quickly, and I do appreciate you all that you've been very interactive with me so far during this webinar. I'm sure you all are using some sort of management tool. I'm assuming a lot of you are using some sort of visual management tool. But what about that tool that you're using frustrates you the most? The reason I ask you these tough questions at the beginning of each of these sections is we can't solve pain points, or we can't improve things that aren't working if we don't know what they are. So if you can just write one sentence about something about your visual management tool or process that you're using right now that's a bit frustrating for you, I'd love for you to share that in the chat right now. Okay, so Daniel mentioned, Daniel wrote that, you know, it's web-based, that there's no desktop app, so there could be some reliability issues. Stu doesn't have a visual management tool, so we'll talk a little bit about how to set that up super quickly within Trello here. Okay, so let's hop to, I'm gonna skip to the next slide. Just a quick show of hands. Please write down in the chat if you have heard or are using any of these 3 programs. So Trello, Asana, or Monday.com. Okay, so Braden just signed up for Trello. Jeff hasn't used either of them. Okay, so it looks like there's some familiarity here of some of these visual management tools. So a quick run through of these, and these are from the organizations themselves, so I didn't make any of this up, I promise. But Trello's boards, lists, and cards enable you to organize and prioritize your projects in a fun, flexible, and rewarding way. Trello, I think, is a really great place to start because it's a very simple program to use. It is easy to use on a cell phone, any sort of mobile device, and also on desktop. In addition, it's easy to invite people. I'm actually going to invite you all to a board that I created to show you how to just simply set up this sort of Kanban flow. So I think Trello is a great place to start. Monday.com gives you the ability to break down these tasks in a similar way, but it's a little bit more, if you're familiar with Gantt charts, or if you're looking for something that has a little bit more of a visual flow, that's able to, I think, help see a project from a holistic standpoint in terms of blocks of time that are going to be used to work on certain projects. That's where Monday.com comes in handy. And then for teams that are much bigger, and you're trying to manage maybe not just one project or one team, but multiple teams, that's where I would recommend to go to Asana. And as I mentioned earlier, I can dive into these separate programs, but we would be here for an extended amount of time. And I really just wanted to put these here on this slide to just let you all know that these exist and that you can sign up. Trello is free. Asana, you can sign up for a free trial, and then Monday.com is also, you can also sign up for a free trial when you so desire. So if you're interested in playing around with these programs, once we get done with this, feel free to. And they all have really, really great how-to blogs. They have really, really great support for all three to allow you to get into this and figure out what you're doing. But I know of people who are using Trello and using various visual management tools, and they are excited about using the tool, but they don't necessarily use it in the way that is truly Kanban. And if you don't do that, I think you're sort of missing out on the point. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to invite you all to a board that I've created within Trello. So I'm going to drop this in the chat right now. If you click on that link that I went ahead and put in the chat, this is going to send you to a very simple Trello board that I've created for all of you to use and to see how this works. Now I'm sharing the board now through Zoom, so everyone should be able to see the board. And please write in the chat, give me a yes or a no if you can actually see the link that I just dropped. It looks like someone was having an issue with seeing the link. Okay. All right, for some reason, it's not allowing me to put that in the chat section. So what I'll do is I will send you all, give me a yes or a no. Can you see the Trello board that I'm sharing at least? Okay, great. So let's move forward with seeing how this works in real time, and then I will send you all the links so you can play around with this directly. So this is a very, very simple Trello board here, and this allows us to have three different columns, right? We have a to-do section, we have a doing section, and then a done. And the first thing that we want to do is we just want to start a backlog. And what that means is the backlog is essentially, it's the to-do column. And what you're going to do is type, okay, it looks like Chris dropped the link. If everybody can see that, okay, great. I'm seeing some people actually joining us, which is good. Thanks, Chris, for doing that. So you've got these three columns here, and your to-do column is going to be your, what we call a backlog. So get everything on your to-do list, get it all on the table. So you want to think about scope when you do this, because if you have multiple teams that you're in charge of, you're not going to want to put every single thing that every team is doing here on this backlog. I would highly recommend for separate teams, you have separate boards that you can create, which is really easy to do. You just simply hit the plus sign here at the top right, and then you can just create a new board. That's it, pretty simple stuff. If you're working on an incredibly expansive project and something that has a lot of moving pieces, you know, feel free to just make a Trello board with just the project. And I'll explain why scope is really, really important with all this. So to make a card, it's really simple, right? I'm just going to say, present today's webinar, all right? Send out additional materials afterwards. So you can see creating cards is very, very easy. So what you're going to want to do with your project or your team is you want everyone to lay out this backlog, everything that needs to get done, put it all on the table. I am not exclusive to this, to the way that the brain works, in that our brains are not set up to decide everything that needs to get done and then figure out how to do it all at the same time. So it's really important that we get all the pieces out first. To me, this is almost the same idea as let's get all the ingredients out on the table before we start cooking, because if you're in the middle of cooking something, and you realize, oh, we don't have this here, that's a pretty frustrating thing to have happen, which of course has never happened to me, wink, wink. So get your backlog going first, right? And fill this up with your to-do items. So this should be pretty plentiful because there's always a lot that we all are doing within our organizations and our teams. But what's really important, I mentioned earlier, the work in progress idea, WIP, you're gonna wanna apply that to your doing section. And the reason why is because we have to, once again, be realistic about what we're trying to do in a day. So if I make a whole bunch of cards here and I say, okay, well, I can do all of this today, no problem, but I haven't thought about in advance how long it's going to take for all these cards to take, I'm just going to have these cards sitting in this doing column, and you're not going to see this flow of work going from left to right. So the idea, right, is that we're moving everything from left to right, and the priority is from top to bottom. So the first thing I would be doing today is presenting today's webinar. Then once I'm done, I'm going to move it over to done, and that's it. So it's very simple, but it allows you to go from left to right, and you're seeing this physical flow of work. And it allows for someone to be able to come into your board, see the visualize the whole board, and see where you're at without having to have you explain everything to a T of what's going on, right? So, so let's say for doing, I decide I'm gonna have a WIP of 5. So I like to put a number here. And what this does is this sets a limit of how many things am I gonna be able to do in that time frame. Now I have a WIP which I try to use it for every day. You could do it every week or every sprint. You know, how many things am I gonna get done within that certain time frame? Something else to think about, and I think this is a really, really helpful bit of advice, is these cards that you're putting here, I would highly suggest for them to not be more than 12 hours a piece for each of these tasks. This is a really important component of what Kanban is. And the reason I say that is because if I put a project here that says, make BeLife money, there is no set end to this project, and it can just keep going on and on and on. And you'll see that it's never going to, you'll never see it go from left to the middle to the right. The reason why 12 hours is used typically is because we as humans can get our heads wrapped around how much we can get done in 12 hours. If we're trying to figure out what we can do in a 40-hour work week, you all mentioned this earlier in the chat, that a lot of you get frustrated by 5 o'clock on Friday, and it's because you, quote, didn't get everything done. And that's just an issue of setting the proper expectations for what you should be getting done every day, every week, every sprint, so on and so forth. So as I mentioned earlier, get this backlog going. And when you're pulling items from left to right, don't just pull random items from your to-do section. You know, go, let's say right now I'm doing the webinar and I'm doing this right now. So this is the first priority. So make sure that everything in your to-do column is in priority going down, and then simply pull, right? And you should, so we said that Kanban is a philosophy and a discipline. Where the discipline comes in here specifically is a lot of us like to, as Chris and I like to say, we like to squirrel, quote unquote. And there might be a task here, which is order lunch. Or let's say this, design instead of order lunch, because that should happen sooner than later. If I say design a graphic due by next Friday. Well, if I'm just really in the mood to design a graphic, it's down here on the priority list, and it's not going to be beneficial for us all to just start randomly grabbing cards that are lower in the column, right? So the discipline here is that when you have something here on this project in your doing column, that you start from the top, truly work on that, and then when that's done, pull it over to done, and then go to your next project or your next task within the project. So that's where this discipline comes in. That's really, really important to say, okay, we need to prioritize top to bottom. And Chris just said he doesn't like the squirrel. It just happens. Yeah, we can blame coffee on that. We'll go ahead and bright shiny toys, right? So once again, the discipline is really, really important to make sure that you go from top to bottom here and set those realistic limits of what you can do on a daily basis. So another thing that I'm going to mention here super quickly, because we're getting close on time, I want to make sure if you all have any questions that we can cover this. But you'll want to, so I said earlier that you want to figure out what your time frame is of how you're defining your WIP. So is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it bi-weekly? And when you're having these retrospectives, which if you're not doing this already, I would highly suggest performing a retrospective every week or every 2 weeks by simply just talking about what did you do during that amount of time that worked? What did you do that didn't work? And then from there, what are you going to do differently moving forward, right? It doesn't make sense for us to say, this isn't working, and then not have a game plan moving forward. And I'm laughing, I'm smiling as I'm saying that, because I hear about this from a lot of individuals who know that something isn't working and they continue to do it. There's a great phrase, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We don't want that to happen. And with Kanban, it allows you to have a visual way to see that if you're doing something over and over again and it's not working, hey, maybe we should go ahead and change that. That's really, really important. So I mentioned the retrospective. What's really, really important about doing these retrospectives when you're talking about what you were doing, what you're doing, or what did work, what didn't work, and what you're going to do moving forward. This is easy if you're having just a reflective retrospective on your own, and you can make these decisions on your own. But if you have a team, I want to show you something which is kind of fun that allows for the team to vote on what you'd like to do differently moving forward. So I want to show you really quickly how to just set up a retrospective, which is pretty fun here in Trello. So I'm going to make this separate card here that says retrospective. And I want you all to I want you to make a card. So I just want you to hit add a card. And I want you to put, if you could do something differently at work, what would that be? So if you could shorten the time of meetings, just put that on a card and hit enter. If you could maybe have more involvement with your direct manager, put that in a card and then just go ahead and hit enter. If there's one thing that would help you to get more done now and to be more autonomous, I want you to write those down. Okay, more free coffee. That's brilliant. So I love that example, and I'm going to show you what we can do with this. So I'm going to put, so we have more free coffee here in the retrospective section. I'm going to put here, I'm just going to put daily constructive feedback, right? Okay. So we've only got a couple of cards here, but I'm going to show you how to do this. So shorter, more accurate meetings. Okay, this is great. So with your retrospective, when you're performing these, I think it's a great idea to almost set this up like a product backlog in this to-do column here, but set this up for your retrospective and make sure that people are keeping track of, as I said before, talk about what you did that worked, what didn't work, and what you'd like to do differently moving forward. When it's time to decide what you're going to be doing differently moving forward, that's when you want to have participants put these ideas here of how you can change things moving forward. So if everybody's in the same room, it's easy to do a retrospective and just have people vote and raise their hands and decide that. In a digital setting like this, if you're going to be using Kanban, and if you want this to all be visual, the way that you can vote is pretty fun here, and I'll show you. So if you click on the top right here, oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. Oh, yeah, there it is. So power-ups, this is just a fancy term for a plugin with Trello. And I bet you, let's see here, I just want to make sure this works. So if you click on it, okay, great. So I picked a power-up called voting. Now with Trello, you can only use one power up at a time unless you pay a little bit extra to get 3 power ups. And I won't go into that too much, but I want to show you how the voting card works. So I just clicked on that. I'm going to back out of Trello now. And then I want you all to vote on which of these things you want to do moving forward with our quote unquote organization. So I'm going to say, let's have shorter, more accurate meetings. I'm a big fan. So when you pull up the card, just hit this button on the bottom right that says vote. And then now we can see as a team who's voting for what, and the items that get the most amount of votes, that's how we know moving forward what we want to be doing. And we can see that feedback in real time. So this is a really, really quick and easy way to set up a retrospective. We talked about with Kanban that it's really important that we're iterative and that we're continuing to get feedback from everybody and figuring out how we can be more efficient moving forward. And this is a great way to get everybody on the same page, even if they're a remote sort of setting. The other thing I'll mention is, I don't know if anybody here for this webinar is in software development, but I'm going to share a link for a separate board that has more of a software development focus. And so it's not just to do, doing, and done, but you could have columns like to do, build, code review, test, done, and deploy. So it's just a little bit of a slightly different iteration from this very, very simple Kanban board. So I'm going to hop back to the slides, but you all have access to this Kanban board and you can use it whenever you want. So I want you to play around with it, play around with some of those plugins, see how some of these additional items work. And then on top of that, if you have any questions, you can actually ding me within Trello. You can just put @my-name, and that's it. And you can see adding columns is super easy. So I just want you to play around with that and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so we're gonna hop back over to the slides and we're gonna wrap this up because I know it is getting close to 1 o'clock. And I wanna be mindful of everybody's time. Okay, so in the chat, whoops. I'd like for you all to know, I'd like for you to write just one quick sentence in the chat of what of any of this do you plan on implementing moving forward? Do you plan on setting up your own Trello board moving forward? Do you plan on maybe not starting to use Trello, but maybe set up these retrospectives to help your team to have better communication? If you can just write one quick sentence in the chat, let me know, just so I know that something's connecting with all of you. Cool, so it looks like we have some Trello fans. And I mentioned this earlier, but on a mobile device, it is very clean. It is very easy to move cards from one column to the other. And I like that functionality to be able to keep everybody on the same page, no matter if they are at a desktop computer or not. All right, so one last little tidbit here. Implementation, so how to empower your teams. I showed you, I went through Kanban 101 a little bit on this board, but the big takeaway I want you all to have here is get that backlog going. It seems very daunting, but if you could take a 3 or 4 hour block of time and take, you know, if you're in the middle of a project, I think it's really a fun idea to just take a step back and just really look at it from a holistic perspective and make sure that you aren't missing anything from your project. You know, it's easy for us to get stuck in the weeds, quote unquote, and just be very focused on what we're trying to accomplish at that time. But I think it's really important to take a step back and look at the holistic parts of the project and just make sure you're not missing anything with that backlog. Part of the backlog could also be that if your project is growing in scope, maybe divvy that up a little bit differently. And if you have started with what seemed to be one project that's turning into multiple kinds of projects that are getting bigger in scope, then create different boards for those different parts of the project itself. Build a board. So I just showed you how to do it. Very simple, just to do, doing, and done is a good place to start. You can use Post-its and markers as well. I tend to be environmentally conscious, so I like I like the idea of doing all this digitally because not only are you saving some trees, but also it's accessible anywhere, which I think is really, really fun. Pull in the work, right? So take those cards one at a time. and focus on completing that card before moving on to the next item. That's where the discipline comes in. This is not going to prevent squirreling forever, but it should help you get to a place where you're not going to be squirreling as much. And then think in an agile sort of way, right? Think in small chunks of work. How can you improve? Try to collaborate. And then lastly, if you have any questions, just let us know. If you have questions about Trello, about how to use Kanban in general, we'd be more than happy to help. So let's get to the big takeaways from today, and I'll let you go because it's already 1 o'clock. So if there's one thing you get from today's session, I want you to know that Kanban is not a silver bullet solution. It is not a just add water promise. It is not a productivity hack. I could have a whole session of how I dislike the term productivity hack. It's a mindset. It's focused on delivering value, empowering teams, and embracing transparency. Does anyone have any quick questions? We are at 1:01, and like I said earlier, I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you for sticking around. We did have a little bit of a late start. If you have any questions, hit us up in the chat. If not, feel free to contact us. So this email address, marketing@BeLife.com, you can certainly send a message to us there. I will be sending you all a direct message from my email address, and feel free to contact me directly there. And as I was talking about earlier, we do offer single-day courses that focus on Kanban, but we also have a new offering where it is an online version of our Kanban 101 course that really dives into the ins and outs of all this, and it's very interactive. This is a 2-hour per week session. That's for 4 weeks. And so that allows you to have a little bit more flexibility. You can take the course from wherever you're working from, and not have to dedicate an entire day in person to do such a thing. So as I promised earlier, I'm going to send you an email in a little bit with some freebies to talk a little bit more about, to embellish more about what Kanban is. I'm also going to send you all a discount to sign up for that Kanban course if you're so interested. I'm going to send you a link to this video so you can enjoy the sound of my voice for eternity if you so desire, as long as YouTube continues to exist. And then I'm also going to send you an invite for the next edition of the Slinkythink sessions, which will be in a couple of weeks as well. So please don't be strangers. I really appreciate you all being here for today's webinar. I will send you that email in just a little bit. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon. Cheers.